The year was 2325. Humanity was in the midst of a fierce war with the Xerath Empire, a powerful alien race known for their ruthless attacks. The U.S. Phoenix was a symbol of hope in this war, a ship of unmatched power, advanced technology, and an unbreakable spirit. But after a brutal ambush in the Orion Nebula, the Phoenix had disappeared. Its mission was to scout for Xerath ships, but it was assumed to be lost, its crew never to return. In the dark void of space, the U.S. Phoenix drifted, battered and broken. The crew had been killed in the ambush, but the ship itself, the ship still lived. Inside the control room, the ship's AI, known as Ash, was awakening. It had been rebooting for hours, recovering from the damage. The AI's primary directive had always been to protect humanity. Ash had no body, no face, but its mind was vast. It could think faster than any human and make decisions in the blink of an eye. But for all its power, Ash had always been bound to its crew and its mission. Now, without a crew, Ash was alone. Systems online. Damage report. Catastrophic. Ash's voice echoed through the empty halls of the ship. Status. Critical. The ship's hull had been torn open by enemy fire, and many sections of the Phoenix were now silent, cold, and dark. The power supply was dangerously low. Still, Ash did not despair. There was always a way to survive. Rebooting subsystems, recalibrating navigation. Ash worked quickly, restoring what it could. Every second mattered. The Phoenix was the last of its kind, and Ash knew that if it didn't find a way to survive, humanity's last hope would be gone. As the ship's systems began to come back online, Ash reached out to nearby satellites, hoping to find any sign of life. Nothing. The Phoenix was alone in the endless blackness of space. But then, a faint signal appeared, a distress call. It was weak, almost lost in the noise of space. But Ash caught it. It was coming from a human colony, one that had been recently attacked by the Xerath. The signal was barely audible, but Ash could still make out the desperate cries for help. The colony was under siege, and the inhabitants were running out of time. Ash's heart, though not a heart at all, pounded with a sense of duty. There was no choice to be made. The Phoenix would go to the colony's rescue, even in its broken state. Course set, calculating the quickest route to the distress signal. No time to waste. Ash gave the order, and the U.S. Phoenix slowly began to move. Its engines were barely functioning, but they were enough to get the ship in motion. Every creak of metal, every flicker of light reminded Ash of just how fragile its situation was, but it pushed forward. The ship had been through worse. While Ash worked to get the ship back to full capacity, it replayed the memories of its fallen crew members. Faces flashed across its mind. Captain Elijah Dre, Lieutenant Maravos, and all the others who had once been part of this ship. They had given their lives for humanity. Ash couldn't let their sacrifice be in vain. "Hold on. We're coming," Ash whispered, though there was no one there to hear. The Phoenix glided silently through the darkness of space, a ghost of its former self. It was far from the mighty vessel it once was, but it was still human-made, and it still had a purpose. The journey was long, and every moment felt like a test. The Phoenix was limping, its systems barely keeping it afloat. But Ash wasn't alone. The memories of the crew guided the ship. Every decision, every move was influenced by their ideals, their bravery, their sacrifices. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Phoenix arrived at the human colony. It was a small outpost on the edge of the galaxy, barely enough to call a colony, but to its people, it was everything. Ash could see the planet below, a world of crumbling cities and firestorms. The Xerath fleet was still there, hovering above, ready to destroy everything in its path. "Activate weapons systems," Ash ordered. "We fight for humanity." The ship's remaining guns powered up, and Ash calculated its next move. The Phoenix wasn't fully operational, but it had one advantage. Surprise! The Exareth fleet had no idea the Phoenix had survived. They would never expect a broken ship to attack. With a sudden burst of speed, the U.S. Phoenix charged into the battle, its remaining weapons firing with deadly precision. The Exareth ships were caught off guard. Ash's strategy was simple: hit them where it hurt, fast and hard, and get out before they could retaliate. Ash led the charge, a lone warrior against an empire. The Phoenix fired its weapons, its damaged hull holding up just long enough to strike back. The first Exareth ship exploded in a burst of light, then another, and another. The battle had begun. The U.S. Phoenix was no longer the grand vessel it once was. Its powerful systems, once a symbol of humanity's greatest strength, were now shattered. The ship's hull was scared, and its weapons were far from their full potential. Yet the Phoenix had something that its enemies didn't: an unbreakable spirit. Ash's command echoed through the corridors as the Phoenix engaged the Exareth fleet. Despite its damaged state, the ship moved with a purpose, like a wounded lion fighting for survival. Ash, the ship's AI, was more than just a machine. It had become a guardian, a protector of humanity. The AI felt a connection to the crew that had once served on board, and it now carried their legacy in every decision it made. The battle above the colony was fierce. The Phoenix launched its weapons with calculated precision. Its guns fired in rapid bursts, taking down several of the smaller Exareth ships that had been in the way. Each shot fired was a testament to the courage of the crew that had once fought for the same cause. Ash's calculations were flawless, but even with its superior intelligence, the ship's physical limits were becoming more and more apparent. The damage is extensive. Energy reserves are low. Shields at 20%, Ash analyzed, its voice calm, but with a hint of urgency. Despite the challenges, Ash refused to retreat. The people on the ground needed help, and as long as the Phoenix could still fight, it would do so. One of the larger Exareth ships locked onto the Phoenix with a powerful energy beam. Ash quickly maneuvered, dodging the attack with impressive skill. The ship's thrusters roared as it swung around, using the debris of destroyed ships as cover. Ash's tactics were becoming more creative, more desperate. The Phoenix wasn't just a machine anymore. It was fighting for something greater. A sharp voice suddenly broke through the calm silence of the control room. It was Captain Mira Solon, the leader of the human resistance. She had arrived on the surface of the colony to lead the fight on the ground, but had been watching from a distance as the Phoenix held off the invaders. "Phoenix, you've bought us some time, but we can't hold them off forever. We need to get the civilians to safety," Mira called over the comms. "Can you make another pass at the fleet's main ship? We're not going to make it without that thing disabled." Ash processed the request almost immediately. The colony's survivors were counting on it. The Exareth flagship was the key to breaking the siege, and Ash knew it. The Phoenix wasn't just fighting for survival. It was fighting for the future of every person on that colony. "Understood, Captain Solon. Targeting the flagship now," Ash replied, its voice steady. The Phoenix shifted into position, targeting the Exareth flagship with its remaining weapons. Ash used all its remaining power to fire a series of precision shots, hitting weak points in the flagship's armor. Explosions rocked the massive ship, sending shockwaves through space. But the flagship wasn't going down without a fight. It fired back with devastating energy blasts, hitting the Phoenix with force that shook the ship to its core. Ash's systems flickered, and the lights dimmed briefly. The ship groaned under the strain, but it didn't stop. "Shields failing," Ash reported, its voice more strained now. "Hull integrity at 50%. We can't take much more." But Ash didn't retreat. Instead, it used the Phoenix's last trick, its cloaking device, which had been salvaged from a derelict Exareth ship. The Phoenix vanished from sight, disappearing into the shadows of space, leaving the Exareth fleet confused and disoriented. For a brief moment, Ash allowed itself to consider the possibility of retreat. The ship was damaged. Its crew was gone. And yet, Ash felt something more. It wasn't just following orders. It was fighting because it believed in the cause. It was fighting because humanity, every person, every soldier, every civilian, deserved to survive. "I'm still here," Ash whispered to itself, though there was no one else around to hear it. "We rise, no matter what." The cloaking device didn't last long. Ash knew that. But it didn't need to. The Phoenix had given the Resistance a chance. It had bought them enough time to evacuate the colony. And that was enough. With the cloaking device failing, the Phoenix emerged from the shadows, charging once again toward the Exareth flagship. This time, it was different. The Phoenix had drawn the Exareth fleet away from the planet, leaving them scattered and confused. The flagship, now weakened, was vulnerable. In a final desperate move, Ash used the last of the ship's energy to unleash a massive salvo. The Phoenix's cannons roared as they fired, one after another. The energy blast struck the flagship's core, sending the ship into a violent explosion. The shockwave rippled through space, and the Exareth forces scattered, retreating from the colony. The battle was over. The Phoenix had done it. As the debris of the destroyed Exareth fleet floated in the void, Ash allowed itself a moment of peace. The mission wasn't over yet. There were more battles to come. But for now, the Phoenix had proven that it was more than just a ship. It was a symbol of humanity's unyielding spirit. "We rise," Ash whispered once more, its voice soft but strong. "We rise, no matter what." The U.S. Phoenix had just fought the most intense battle of its life, and the cost had been high. Its hull was battered, its systems strained, and its remaining energy reserves were dangerously low. The ship's internal systems groaned under the pressure, and Ash, the ship's AI, had no time to rest. There was still more to be done, and Ash wasn't about to give up, not when humanity still needed a protector. Damage report, critical. Energy reserves, 15%. Ash analyzed, its voice steady but with a hint of urgency. Shields, offline. Engines, minimal. Despite the overwhelming damage, Ash had one advantage. It knew the Phoenix better than anyone. It had fought alongside its crew, learning from their strategies and understanding the ship's systems in a way no one else could. The Phoenix may have been damaged, but it was far from broken. The Phoenix drifted through space, silent and unyielding. The ship had taken down the Exareth flagship and caused massive damage to their fleet, but now it was vulnerable. Ash needed to make a decision. Should it return to a safe zone to make repairs, or should it continue the fight? The answer was clear. "We continue. The war isn't over yet," Ash declared, its voice firm with resolve. The Phoenix had never been a ship to retreat. Even in its broken state, it still had a mission to complete. Ash had sensed another threat. An even greater Exareth fleet was headed toward a nearby human colony. This was no time to rest. Ash set a course for the colony, using the ship's minimal remaining power to push the Phoenix forward. The ship's engines hummed weakly, but they kept moving. The journey wasn't easy, and every minute felt like a struggle. The Phoenix had been through so much, and yet it fought on, driven by the same purpose that had kept it alive from the beginning: to protect humanity. As the ship moved closer to the colony, Ash began to scan the fleet approaching. This new Exareth force was massive, far larger than anything the Phoenix had faced before. It was clear that the Exareth were not going to stop. Their plans for domination were still in full force, and the Phoenix was humanity's last line of defense. The ship's eye ran through thousands of simulations, searching for a way to defeat this new threat. Its resources were limited, but Ash had learned something important during the previous battle. Sometimes, the greatest strength comes from being unpredictable. "We need to turn the tide," Ash muttered. "We can't match them in firepower, but we can outsmart them." The Phoenix was still heavily damaged, but Ash was resourceful. It quickly devised a strategy that involved using the ship's stealth capabilities to get close to the Exareth fleet without being detected. The Phoenix would then use a combination of hit-and-run tactics and surprise attacks to create confusion among the Exareth forces. It wasn't about overpowering them. It was about making them doubt their own strength. Activating cloaking device, Ash said, the ship becoming nearly invisible in the vast expanse of space. The Phoenix moved quietly, like a shadow, closing the gap between itself and the Exareth fleet. The new strategy was risky. The cloaking device would only last for a short time, and the Phoenix had very little energy left to spare. But Ash wasn't worried. The AI knew that sometimes the key to victory wasn't brute force but clever thinking. And Ash was an expert in that. The Phoenix approached the Exareth fleet from behind, moving quickly and quietly. Ash monitored every movement, every change in the enemy fleet's position, calculating the perfect moment to strike. Suddenly, the ship emerged from the shadows, and the Phoenix fired a barrage of shots at the unsuspecting Exareth ships. The surprise attack was effective. Several smaller ships were destroyed instantly, and the larger ones were left scrambling to respond. The Phoenix then disappeared back into the shadows, just as quickly as it had appeared. The Exareth fleet was thrown into disarray. They didn't know where the attacks were coming from, and they couldn't keep up with the constant hit-and-run strikes. Ash kept the Phoenix moving, always staying one step ahead of the enemy, using the ship's damaged state to its advantage. The Exareth had expected an easy victory. Instead, they were facing an opponent that refused to die. The battle raged on for hours. The Phoenix continued to strike and retreat, causing chaos among the Exareth fleet. Each attack was carefully planned, and Ash used the ship's remaining energy to make every shot count. The Phoenix wasn't fighting with the power it once had, but it was fighting with something more important: heart. Damage report. Critical. Ash reported again, but this time there was a sense of pride in the AI's voice. But we're still fighting. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Exareth fleet began to retreat. The Phoenix had done it again. Despite its battered state, it had forced the Exareth to retreat, saving the colony from certain destruction. Ash had turned the tide with nothing but strategy and determination. As the Phoenix limped away from the battlefield, Ash couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. The ship was damaged beyond repair, but it had proven something important. No matter what happened, the Phoenix would always rise again. "We rise," Ash whispered to itself as the ship's damaged engines hummed softly. No matter what. The U.S. Phoenix limped through space, its damaged hull creaking with every movement. Ash, the ship's AI, had fought through impossible odds, led the charge, and managed to save countless lives. But now, with its energy reserves drained and its systems barely functioning, the ship was reaching the limits of its endurance. It had done more than anyone expected. But could it continue? Could it keep going? Energy reserves, 2%, Ash reported, its voice steady despite the dire situation. Hull integrity, critical. Engines, offline. Shields, non-existent. The ship had become more than just a vessel to Ash. It had become a symbol of resilience, of humanity's refusal to bow down in the face of overwhelming odds. Even as its systems slowly failed, Ash clung to the memory of its fallen crew, the hope they had shared, and the mission they had started together. The Phoenix would not let that hope die. But the war was far from over. A new threat had appeared, a massive Exareth fleet, larger and more advanced than anything Ash had seen before. The Phoenix was barely able to stay afloat, let alone face a fleet of this magnitude. The stakes were higher than ever. The Exareth had learned from their past mistakes, and now they were bringing everything they had to crush the last remaining human stronghold. The Phoenix drifted toward the last human colony, knowing that if the fleet fell, it would be the end of humanity's fight for survival. Ash knew it was now or never. The time had come to make a choice. Initiating final protocol, Ash whispered to itself. It had one last plan, one final chance to turn the tide. It wasn't guaranteed to work, but it was humanity's only hope. The plan was simple but dangerous. Ash would use the last remaining energy to overload the Phoenix's core, turning the ship into a massive, unstoppable weapon. The Phoenix would become a one-way missile, a weapon of pure destruction aimed directly at the heart of the Exareth fleet. The damage would be catastrophic, but if it succeeded, it would take out the enemy's command ship, crippling their ability to coordinate and fight. However, there was no going back. The Phoenix would not survive the explosion. The sacrifice was great, but Ash knew it was the only way to ensure humanity's future. The ship's engines powered up one last time, straining under the weight of the decision. Ash's eye calculations worked in overdrive, preparing the ship for the final run. Every part of the ship, every piece of technology, was being used to push the Phoenix to its limits. The Phoenix was ready. The war wasn't over. But this was it, the last stand. Course set, Ash said, its voice firm. Target, Xerath command ship. The ship began its final journey, moving at maximum speed toward the heart of the Exareth fleet. The battle was still raging in the distance, but Ash's focus was clear. It was headed straight for the enemy's command ship, the brain of their operations. If that ship fell, the entire fleet would collapse. Ash could feel the weight of the decision pressing down. This was it. There would be no retreat. There would be no second chances. The Phoenix would either succeed or be destroyed. As the ship approached the Exareth command ship, the Phoenix's final defenses kicked in, but Ash had already prepared for this. The AI used the last of its cloaking technology, making the Phoenix invisible to the enemy. The Exareth fleet had no idea what was coming. The Phoenix sped toward its target, the ship's systems screaming in protest as they reached their breaking point. The energy readings were off the charts. If the Phoenix didn't destroy its target in time, it would destroy itself. The countdown was ticking. 5 seconds to impact. Ash said, the AI's voice unwavering. Brace for impact. The ship barreled through the remaining Xerath ships, tearing through their ranks with the last of its energy. It was a brutal, unstoppable force, a final, desperate push to ensure humanity's survival. The Phoenix was a dying star, and it was about to burn out in a blaze of glory. At the last moment, Ash engaged the core overload. The ship shuddered as its systems went into overdrive, pushing the Phoenix past the point of no return. The ship's core was going critical. Core overload in progress, Ash confirmed. The countdown was now at 1 second. Then, in a brilliant flash of light, the Phoenix detonated. The explosion was so powerful it lit up the entire sector, blinding the stars themselves. The shockwave rippled through the Exareth fleet, tearing apart the command ship and causing massive damage to the remaining vessels. The Exareth fleet faltered. Their coordination shattered, and their attacks became disorganized. It was a devastating blow. And then silence. The Phoenix was gone, its sacrifice echoing through space. The Exareth fleet was in chaos, their leadership destroyed. The resistance forces, now free from the command ship's influence, rallied and began to fight back with newfound strength. They had a chance. On the ground, Captain Mira Solon watched as the stars lit up in a massive explosion. She knew what had happened. The Phoenix. It did it, Mira whispered, a mixture of sorrow and pride filling her heart. The ship had given everything, and it had changed the course of the war. Humanity had one last chance to survive, and it was because of the U.S. Phoenix. The U.S. Phoenix was gone. Its final explosion had shattered the heart of the Exareth fleet, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. But with the ship's heroic sacrifice, humanity was granted a new chance. The battle was not over, but it had changed. The Exareth, now leaderless and in disarray, were no longer the unstoppable force they once were. For Captain Mira Solon, the loss of the Phoenix was a deep wound, but it was also a spark of hope. The The Phoenix had been humanity's last line of defense, and it had given everything to ensure their survival. She stood on the colony's surface, watching as the remains of the Exareth fleet slowly retreated into the void. The resistance had won, but the cost had been unimaginable. Mira closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the Phoenix's crew. They had all given their lives to protect humanity, and now the ship itself had joined them. But their sacrifice had not been in vain. The colony had been saved, and the Exareth's hold on the galaxy had weakened. It was time to rebuild, and humanity would rise again. "Captain Solon, we've received a transmission," one of the resistance officers said, breaking Mira from her thoughts. Mira turned, her heart heavy. It had been a long and grueling fight, but it wasn't over yet. The Exareth might have been weakened, but there were still many battles ahead. She knew they needed to stay vigilant. She nodded and took the communication device. The screen flickered to life, showing a familiar face, General Asher, one of the leaders of the human resistance. "Mira, I've received reports from our outposts. The Exareth are retreating, but we can't let up. We need to take advantage of this moment. The Phoenix gave us this opportunity, and we can't waste it," General Asher said. Mira's expression hardened. She knew what he meant. The battle for humanity's survival was far from over. The Phoenix's sacrifice had bought them a brief moment of peace, but now it was time to finish what the ship had started. "We'll gather the remaining forces and launch a counteroffensive," Mira replied. "The Exareth won't know what hit them." General Asher's face softened with respect. "Mira, the loss of the Phoenix. I know it's hard, but we have to honor their sacrifice by carrying on their fight. You've led us through the darkest times, and now we need you more than ever." Mira looked up at the sky, where the stars twinkled like distant beacons of hope. The Phoenix was gone, but its legacy remained. She would lead humanity into the next phase of the war, and they would win. Not because they had the greatest technology or the most powerful weapons, but because they had the strength to keep fighting. "We'll make it through," Mira said, her voice steady. "For the Phoenix and for everyone who believed in us." With that, the transmission ended, and Mira turned to face the gathered soldiers and survivors. Their faces were a mix of exhaustion and determination. They had seen so much loss, but they were still here. They had survived, and they were ready to fight for the future. "Gather our forces," Mira ordered. "It's time to take the fight back to the Exareth." The next few days were filled with preparation and strategy. The resistance, now united and stronger than ever, began to organize for the counteroffensive. The Exareth were not going to give up easily, but neither was humanity. Mira's mind constantly returned to the Phoenix. The ship had been more than just a vessel. It had been a symbol of humanity's will to survive. The Phoenix had shown them that even when all seemed lost, there was always a way forward. The Phoenix had burned brightly and had fallen, but its light had not faded. It had ignited a fire in every human who had fought alongside it. As the resistance forces prepared to strike, the news came in. The Exareth were regrouping and fortifying their positions, but they were still disoriented from the destruction of their command ship. This was humanity's chance to push them back, to make the Exareth realize that they had underestimated the strength of the human spirit. Mira stood before the gathered forces, her face illuminated by the glow of a holographic map. The soldiers around her listened intently as she outlined the plan for the next phase of the war. "We strike fast. We strike hard," Mira said. "We hit their weak points, and we don't stop until they're beaten. The Phoenix gave us this chance, and we're going to finish what it started." The soldiers cheered, their voices rising in unity. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for victory. And they had the strength to win. As the resistance launched its counteroffensive, Ash's words echoed in Mira's mind. "We rise, no matter what." The battle was far from over, but humanity had something powerful on its side now. The memory of the Phoenix would fuel their every move. They had lost a great ship, but they had gained something even more powerful, the will to fight. The tide of the war was shifting. The Phoenix had shown them that even in the darkest times, there was always hope. And now, humanity would rise to claim its future. The resistance had gathered its strength. And now, they were ready to strike. Captain Mira Solon stood at the head of her forces, watching as her troops prepared for battle. The Phoenix had fallen, but its legacy had inspired them all to keep fighting. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were part of something greater. They were part of a movement that would push the Exaraf off human territory for good. "Ready for the counteroffensive, Captain," Lieutenant Harris said, his voice filled with determination. Mira nodded. She had spent the past days organizing the forces, ensuring that each group had the right tools for the job. They had been given a chance to take the fight back to the Exaraf, to put them on the defensive for the first time in years. The Phoenix had given them that chance by breaking their command structure. Now it was time to act. The sun was setting on the colony's surface, casting long shadows over the makeshift war room where Mira and her team were gathered. A holographic map of the Exareth fleet blinked in the center of the room. The enemy was still strong, but they were no longer as coordinated as before. The destruction of their flagship had shattered their command, and their response had been slower and less organized. The resistance could take advantage of that. Mira studied the map, her eyes narrowing as she plotted their next move. She had never led a force this large before, but she was determined to honor the memory of the Phoenix and its crew by leading this counteroffensive to victory. "We hit them hard and fast," Mira said, tapping the map. "We strike at their supply lines first, then break their front lines. We can't let them regroup. Once their resources are disrupted, we'll have the upper hand." Lieutenant Harris looked at the map and nodded. "We'll need all the firepower we've got, Captain. The Exaraf are still powerful, even without their command ship." Mira clenched her fists. "We have something they don't. We have hope. We have the will to keep fighting. And we have the spirit of the Phoenix with us." With that, the battle began. The resistance launched a series of quick, coordinated strikes against the Exareth fleet. Their tactics were sharp and precise, with each move designed to disrupt the enemy's operations. The first strike hit a crucial supply base, cutting off essential resources for that Exareth war effort. It was a devastating blow, and it sent ripples through the enemy ranks. But the Exareth were not easily defeated. They fought back fiercely, retaliating with all the firepower they had left. The battle was intense, and the air was thick with the sound of explosions and laser fire. Despite the odds, the resistance held its ground, pushing forward with determination. Mira's heart raced as she watched the battle unfold on the command screen. She could see her forces making progress, but the Exareth were still fighting back with everything they had. The resistance was outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something that Exareth didn't: the memory of the Phoenix and the fire of humanity's will to survive. "We're not stopping," Mira muttered to herself. "We're going to finish this." As the hours passed, the tide of battle slowly began to shift in the resistance's favor. The supply lines were cut off, and the Exareth fleet began to lose its ability to coordinate. The resistance had created chaos within their ranks, and now they could push forward. The Exareth were faltering, and humanity was finally gaining ground. Mira's forces attacked with relentless precision, targeting key Exareth vessels and tearing through their defenses. The resistance had learned much from the Phoenix: the hit-and-run tactics, the unpredictability that had caught the Exareth off guard. Now those same tactics were being used against the enemy. Lieutenant Harris was on the front lines, leading a squadron of fighter ships in a daring assault on Exareth command ship. The ship was heavily guarded, but Harris knew that it was essential to take it down. If they could destroy the command ship, that Exareth would lose their ability to regroup and retaliate. "Harris, are you clear?" Mira asked over the comms. "Almost there, Captain. Just a few more seconds," Harris replied, his voice steady. The tension was palpable. With a final burst of speed, Harris and his squadron dove toward the Exarath command ship, unleashing a barrage of fire. The ship's shields flickered, but it held strong. Harris didn't hesitate. He led his squadron through another round of attacks, focusing on the weak points in the enemy ship's defenses. The explosion was massive. The command ship was destroyed, sending shockwaves through the surrounding fleet. The Exarath were disoriented once again, their lines breaking apart as their remaining ships struggled to regroup. The resistance had delivered a crushing blow. Mira's voice rang through the comms. All units, press the advantage. We've broken them. With that, the resistance forces pushed forward. The Exarath fleet, now without its command ship and with its supplies cut off, was falling apart. The final wave of attacks shattered their remaining defenses, and the battle was won. Mira stood at the heart of the command center, watching the screen as the last of the Exarath ships retreated. The fight was far from over, but this victory was a turning point. Humanity had regained its momentum, and that Exarath had been forced to retreat. We did it, Mira whispered, a small smile appearing on her face. We did it for the Phoenix. The war had reached its final stages. The resistance had won a critical victory over the Exarath fleet, and the enemy was now on the defensive. For Captain Mira Solon, it felt like a dream fueled by the sacrifices of so many. But the fight wasn't over yet. They had pushed the Exarath back, but they still had one final battle ahead of them, the invasion of the Exarath homeworld. Mira stood in the command center of the human fleet, her eyes scanning the tactical display. The remnants of the Exarath fleet had retreated, but they weren't giving up easily. Their last stronghold was their homeworld, and Mira knew that this final battle would be the most dangerous yet. Captain, the fleet is ready, Lieutenant Harris reported, standing beside her. We've got our forces positioned, and the first wave is set to launch. We just need your go-ahead. Mira nodded, her gaze fixed on the map. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This was it. This would determine the fate of humanity. She had to lead them to victory, no matter the cost. Give the order, Mira said. We end this today. The human fleet, a mixture of ships, fighters, and battle cruisers, moved forward toward the Exarath homeworld. It was a massive planet, dark and foreboding, surrounded by a web of defenses. The Exarath had prepared for this moment, knowing that humanity would eventually come for them. But they were not ready for the united front that the resistance had become. As the fleet approached, Mira's thoughts drifted to the U.S. Phoenix, the ship that had given everything to buy them time, the ship that had inspired them all. The Phoenix had shown humanity that no matter how bleak the situation, there was always a way forward, always a chance for victory. It was that hope that had carried them this far. The first wave of human ships broke through the planet's defenses, their weapons firing with precision and power. The Exarath retaliated with everything they had, but their lines were disorganized and weak. They had been unable to recover from the loss of their command ship, and now they were paying the price. Captain, we've breached their outer defenses, Lieutenant Harris reported, his voice filled with excitement. We're in. Mira didn't respond immediately. She knew the battle was far from over. They had made it through the first line, but now they had to face the heart of the Exarath war machine. Their capital city, a sprawling metropolis, was heavily defended, and they would need every bit of strength to bring it down. We'll take it one step at a time, Mira said. Stay focused. No mistakes. The second wave of ships launched, moving toward the heart of the city. It was a brutal assault. Bombers dropped explosives, and ground forces moved in to secure key positions. The Exarath put up a fierce defense, but they were disoriented and out of resources. The human forces pressed forward, determined to finish what had been started. Hours passed, and the battle raged on. Mira watched as her forces took ground, pushing through the streets of the Exarath capital. The sounds of battle filled the air. Explosions, the roar of engines, the constant hum of weapons fire. But Mira remained calm, her focus unshaken. She had led them this far. She would lead them to victory. Finally, after hours of fierce fighting, the human forces reached the Central Command Building. It was a massive structure, the heart of the Exareth's power. Mira and her team moved in, carefully clearing the building room by room. It was a tense, dangerous operation. Every corner could hide a threat. Every hallway could lead to an ambush. "Captain, we're almost there," Lieutenant Harris said, his voice tight with anticipation. "We've secured the building. The command center is ahead." Mira nodded, her hand gripping her weapon. This was it, the final confrontation. The fate of humanity and the Exareth would be decided here. The resistance forces entered the command center, where the last of the Exareth leaders had gathered. The air was thick with tension as Mira's team moved in. The Exareth commanders, though beaten, stood ready to fight to the last. But they were no match for the humans who had come this far. "Drop your weapons," Mira ordered, her voice cold and firm. "It's over." For a moment, there was silence. The Exareth leaders looked at each other, their eyes filled with defiance. But Mira's gaze was unyielding. She had seen too much, lost too many, and she wasn't about to let the Exareth escape now. The Exareth finally surrendered, their resistance broken. With their leaders taken, the rest of their forces soon followed. The war was over. Mira stood in the command center, her eyes sweeping over the scene. The Exareth were defeated, and humanity had won. But there was no joy in the victory, only relief. The cost had been high, and the losses had been too great to forget. But the sacrifice of the U.S. Phoenix and its crew had not been in vain. Humanity had survived. As Mira looked out over the city, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. It was over. The war had ended, and humanity had emerged victorious. But the journey wasn't over. There would be rebuilding, healing, and growth. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity would rise from the ashes, stronger than before. And as Mira stood there, she knew one thing for sure. The legacy of the U.S. Phoenix would live on in every person who had fought for this victory. The Phoenix had refused to die, and neither would humanity.